At 7:27 in the evening, on a black stretch of road in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, a woman named Faith Westman looked out her window and saw a car folded into a snowbank. She called it in. Nothing unusual about that. Cars go off that road every winter. The curve is sharp, the pavement is old, and in February it's covered in ice most nights before 6. What was unusual is what happened in the next 10 minutes. A bus driver named Butch Atwood, heading home from his route, pulled over to check on the driver. He found a young woman standing outside the wrecked car. She told him she was fine, just shaken up. She said she'd already called AAA and asked him not to call the police. He called them anyway. Officer Cecil Smith was dispatched at 7:29. By the time he reached the crash site, the woman was gone. Not injured and waiting in her car, not walking down the road toward town, gone. Her purse was still inside the vehicle. Her cell phone was still inside the vehicle. The keys were still in the ignition. 22 years later, nobody has ever explained what happened in that window. And nobody has ever seen Maura Murray again. This is the story of one of the strangest missing persons cases in American history. A case built entirely on a woman's final 24 hours, and a 10-minute gap that investigators still can't account for. Before we get to that night, you need to understand who Maura Murray was, because almost everything about this case starts with a simple, uncomfortable question. Why would someone like her disappear on purpose? She was 21. Raised in Hanson, Massachusetts, the fourth of 5 kids in a tight, disciplined Irish Catholic household. Her parents split when she was young, but both stayed involved. Growing up, she was the kind of kid teachers described as gifted and driven, a standout in track and cross country, sharp enough academically that she was accepted into West Point. She didn't finish there. She left the academy, the reasons murky even now, and enrolled instead at the University of Massachusetts Amherst to study nursing. By all accounts, she was good at it, compassionate. The kind of person who, according to her sister, used to spend her free time as a teenager sitting with elderly patients at a nursing home just to make them laugh. She had a boyfriend, a young man in the military. She had a job on campus, working security overnight shifts. She had classes, clinical rotations, homework assignments due the next morning. On paper, nothing about her life looked like someone preparing to vanish. Except that in the days leading up to February 9th, 2004, something in her started to unravel, and almost nobody around her noticed until it was too late to ask why. Here is what we know about her final 24 hours. Reconstructed from cell phone records, email logs, ATM footage, and witness statements collected in the years since. The night before, she spoke by phone with her older sister for a long stretch. The conversation touched on the sister's struggles with alcohol. Not long after hanging up, Maura became visibly upset during her overnight security shift. Upset enough that a supervisor walked her back to her dorm room personally. That was the first sign. It would not be the last. Early the next morning at 3:32 a.m., she emailed a nursing assignment to her classmates. Routine. Normal. The kind of small, boring task that tells you a person is planning to be around tomorrow. By early afternoon, that had changed. At 12:55 p.m., she placed a call to a condo rental in Bartlett, New Hampshire, a place she'd stayed once before with her father and boyfriend. The owner didn't remember the call and later confirmed no reservation was made. At 1 p.m., she emailed her boyfriend. The message was short, affectionate, and ordinary. It would be the last direct communication between them. At 1:13, she called a fellow student to arrange returning some borrowed clothes. Then at 1:24 p.m., she sent an email to her professors. She told them she needed to leave for a week. She said there had been a death in the family. There had been no death in the family. At 2:05, she called a Vermont tourism hotline, asking about lodging in Stowe. The reservation line was down. Nothing was booked. At 3:15, she stopped at an ATM in Hadley, Massachusetts, and withdrew $280, nearly every cent she had. Surveillance footage captured the withdrawal. From there, she drove to a liquor store, returned a stack of old bottles and cans for a small refund, and used the cash to buy vodka, Kahlua, a small bottle of Bailey's, and a 12-pack of beer. Then she packed her car and left campus, driving north. She printed directions toward Burlington, Vermont. She never got there. somewhere along a winding stretch of Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire, roughly 2 hours from campus, and nowhere near anywhere she had told anyone she was going. Her black Saturn spun out on the ice and slammed into a snowbank. It was 7:27 in the evening, and that's where the 10-minute window begins. When Officer Smith arrived at the scene, the car was empty. Inside it, investigators found her purse, her phone, a stack of duplicate accident report forms she'd picked up earlier that day from a police station near campus, as if she had anticipated needing them, and a red-stained soda bottle that some investigators believed showed she'd been drinking before the crash. There was also a rag stuffed into the exhaust pipe. Her father would later say that was a trick he'd taught her years earlier, a way to stop smoke leaking from a faulty engine into the cabin. To some investigators, that detail suggested car trouble that predated the crash. To others, it suggested nothing at all. Outside the car, there was no blood, no signs of a struggle, no torn clothing, no drag marks, nothing to indicate violence had occurred at the scene. Search dogs picked up her scent roughly 100 yards east of the crash site. Then the trail stopped, just stopped, in the middle of open ground, with no explanation for why a scent trail would simply end. For days afterward, New Hampshire mobilized one of the largest search efforts the region had seen. Helicopters, thermal imaging, snowshoe teams combing the tree line. They found nothing. Not a shoe, not a shred of clothing, not a single physical trace that she had ever walked away from that car under her own power. And in the middle of all of it, one detail kept nagging at investigators more than any other. The timeline didn't add up. Butch Atwood, the bus driver, placed his 911 call at 7:42 p.m. Dispatch logs and Officer Smith's own account place his arrival at the scene between 7:45 and 7:46, roughly on schedule for the drive from where he'd been. But a separate witness, identified in later reporting only as Witness A, claimed to have seen a police SUV parked nose-to-nose with a dark sedan at the crash site between 7:33 and 7:37 p.m. That's 8 to 12 minutes before Officer Smith's documented arrival. If that witness is right, then someone else's vehicle, not Officer Smith's, was already at the scene, facing Maura's car head-on, before any officer had been dispatched to help her. Nobody has ever identified who that could have been. Investigators have never confirmed the sighting. It's possible the witness misjudged the time, or misremembered the vehicle, or was simply wrong. Eyewitness accounts of exact minutes, years after the fact, are notoriously unreliable. But the discrepancy has never been fully resolved, and it sits at the center of nearly every serious theory about what happened to her. Because if someone was there before the police, offering help or something else, that's a window in which Maura Murray could have left that crash site by choice or by force, and nobody watching the official timeline would ever know. In the earliest days of the investigation, New Hampshire police leaned toward one theory above all others: that Maura Murray had walked away on purpose. It's easy to see why. Everything about her final hours pointed to a woman planning to disappear, the fabricated story about a death in the family, the withdrawal of nearly all her money, the calls to lodging across 2 different states. None of it looked like a person heading toward a normal week of nursing classes. Investigators floated the idea that she simply wanted a new life, that the crash was an accident layered on top of a plan already in motion, and that when the bus driver offered to call police, she panicked. Not because she was in danger, but because she didn't want to be found. Her family has never accepted that explanation. Her father spent years disputing it, publicly and repeatedly. He returned to Haverhill almost every weekend for months after her disappearance, searching the woods himself long after official search teams had gone home. In interviews marking the case's 10th and 15th anniversaries, he stated flatly that he believed his daughter was dead, and specifically pointed to a nearby house where cadaver dogs had once reacted, a lead investigators dug into but never confirmed. A private investigator the family later hired reached a similar conclusion: that the most probable explanation was that she had been picked up by someone, and that the encounter had not ended well. Though he was careful to note that picked up did not necessarily mean by force at the very start. That distinction matters, because it points to the theory that unsettles people the most: that whoever left in that 10-minute window wasn't a rescuer at all. There is no confirmed evidence that a specific person abducted Maura Murray. To be clear about that, in over 2 decades, no individual has ever been named a suspect, charged, or formally accused by law enforcement in connection with her disappearance. Any theory naming a person is speculation from outside investigators, true crime writers, and online communities, not an official finding. What law and parties will say is that the case remains open. It has been handled by New Hampshire's Cold Case Unit since 2009, and it is officially classified not as a routine missing persons case, but as a suspicious one. 3 explanations have persisted for over 20 years, and none of them has ever been eliminated. The first, that she wandered into the woods in the freezing cold, disoriented from the crash or from alcohol, and succumbed to hypothermia before anyone could find her. Her body still undiscovered somewhere in terrain that swallows things whole. The second, that she accepted a ride from a stranger, willingly, in that first confused moment after the crash, and that ride ended in her death at someone else's hands. The third, that everything about her final day, the lie to her professors, the drained bank account, the trip north to nowhere she'd told anyone about, was exactly what it looked like, that she orchestrated her own disappearance and simply never wanted to be found. Investigators have never been able to fully rule out any of the 3. And that, more than any single piece of evidence, is what has kept this case alive online for over 20 years. Maura Murray disappeared 5 days before Facebook turned 1 week old. There was no YouTube, no Twitter, no true crime podcast ecosystem the way we know it now. And yet somehow her case became one of the first true internet mysteries, a story that spread not through television, but through message boards and early social forums where strangers built timelines, cross-referenced witness statements, and argued over theories the same way people do today. By 2007, fan pages dedicated to finding her had appeared on Facebook and MySpace. By 2017, the case had been turned into a 6-part Oxygen documentary series, prompting a fresh wave of tips. Books have been written about it. Podcasts have dedicated entire seasons to it. Her sister, a West Point graduate herself, has spent recent years using platforms like TikTok to keep the case in front of a new generation, correcting misinformation, sharing new leads, and reminding the internet, gently but firmly, that her sister is not a puzzle. She is a person, a daughter, someone a family is still waiting to bring home. That distinction gets lost easily online, where a 20-year-old cold case becomes content. Theories, timelines, dramatic reenactments. For the family, there is no content. There is only the same open question every single day for over 2 decades. As of this year, the New Hampshire Attorney General's Cold Case Unit says the investigation remains open. Investigators say they continue to receive tips. Every so often, a new lead sends a search team back to a basement, a stretch of woods, a patch of ground nobody has checked in years. So far, every single one of those searches has come back empty. No remains, no confirmed sighting, no arrest. 2 decades of theories and not one of them has ever been proven. What we're left with is this. A 21-year-old woman crashed her car on an empty road in New Hampshire. On a night she had told no one she'd be there. 10 minutes passed, and in those 10 minutes, without a single trace, without a scream anyone heard or a struggle anyone saw, she disappeared completely. Maybe she walked into the trees and the cold took her before anyone could search that ground. Maybe someone was already parked at that crash site, headlights facing hers before any officer had even been called. Maybe she is, right now, somewhere else entirely, living a life she built for herself out of a lie about a death that never happened. Nobody knows. Her family is still waiting for an answer they may never get. If you were investigating this case, the fabricated story to her professors, the drained bank account, the unexplained trip north, the possible second car at the scene before police arrived, which of the 3 theories would you follow first?